Hello, welcome people who've joined us in the room, those joined us online, and those who are watching later. So this is the third event in our postgraduate week in psychology. It's a week because it's slightly over a week. And I'm Patrick Monaghan. I'm chair of our recruitment, undergraduate and postgraduate recruitment in our department, and as well as our outreach events with the general public. So, whoop. So we're on the third event today and the third event in our programme, where we'll give you a bit more of an introduction to the Developmental Psychology Master's course. And we have with us Gert Westermann as well, who's Professor of Developmental Psychology. Is that your title, or at least work in developmental psychology? Yeah, he thinks so. Anyway, Gert Westermann, who's a genuine developmental psychologist in the department, and here to give some extra detail about developmental psychology. But I'm just going to start with a general introduction to the department and how developmental psychology fits into our department's structure and interests. So here's our core masters team. So if you come and do developmental psychology masters here, then you'll meet all these people. And really important among these people are those in the top left, who's Claire and Nadine, and they work in our postgraduate office. And so those people are available all the time to answer your questions and to support your postgraduate studies in the department. Also important here in the bottom right is Gina Fisher, who's sitting at the back of the room here as well. And Gina Fisher deals with our recruitment, and you can contact her at any point as well, and she can point you to the right person to talk about regarding your question. But our core masters team involves a lot of people, all of whom you'll make contact with and be taught and interact with as part of your master's degree here at Lancaster. If you've watched the general introduction, you'll have seen quite a bit of this already, but I'll just go over it and give it the unique developmental psychology flavour. So doing a master's here in Lancaster in psychology means that you have access to our excellent facilities. So in the most recent assessment of our research, we were rated as 100% internationally excellent or world leading in terms of the research that we do and also the facilities that we have to support postgraduate study and academic research more generally. And in particular, what's really important is that we have our own building, which is just for research and training. And so if you do your master's here in Lancaster, then you will be contacting quite a lot with this building, using the facilities in this building. And so in this building, we have a top floor dedicated to adult testing and a bottom floor which is dedicated to infant and child testing. And the bottom picture here shows the lobby area of the downstairs floor, where parents and their children come in and feel immediately comfortable. And there's a full-time person there who helps support studies and helps with recruitment and so on for our infant and child studies, and works with lots of our master students on developmental psychology masters. So there's lots of really good cutting edge neurophysiological and cognitive equipment available. And a lot of this is really geared towards testing young children. So for example, we have EEG systems, which are dedicated to infant and child testing. We have functional near infrared spectroscopy, which is another technique for investigating brain activity and particularly useful for working with children. We also have TMS, which we don't tend to use with children. That's transcranial magnetic stimulation and transcranial direct stimulation and VR, and lots of eye tracking facilities. And again, some of these eye tracking facilities are particularly geared towards measuring children. So, for example, if you can't ask a child what they're thinking when they can't yet speak, but you can look at where they're looking to see what their mind is doing. And so in particular, we have these world-leading child testing labs. So some of the best facilities in the world for infant and child testing. In terms of our research strengths, we cover a broad range of research interests within our department. And in particular, we have a group who are interested in infancy and early development, and they work on typical and atypical development and also social and cognitive growth. And that group on infancy and early development interact with all sorts of organizations in the university more generally, and nationally and internationally with other groups, to make sure that the very latest research innovations are accessible to our postgraduate students for their training. Also important for the developmental psychology masters is the way in which we collaborate and interact internationally. So this is really important, we feel, for the quality of our research. So we know that Lancaster University is one of the top universities in the UK, but also one of the top universities internationally. So for a new university, it's ranked very highly, 122nd in the world. And in particular, we're ranked in the top 50 universities in the world in terms of our international outlook. So that's in terms of the collaborations that we have with other groups around the world. And this graph, if you've been to any of the previous events, you'll have seen this already, but this graph shows the active collaborations we have between members of our department and researchers in other countries. So lots of collaborations with researchers in North America, throughout Europe, just about every country in Europe, and also Central and Southern Africa, a few in South America, Eastern Asia, and Australasia, including New Zealand. So lots of collaborations, and these are really key to the success of our research and the importance of training such that it is done with collaboration internationally. And this means that as part of the developmental psychology masters, you have access to all these interesting questions about comparative research and cross-cultural and cross-linguistic research that might be of interest to you. We have 4 master's degrees in our department. Developmental psychology is for advancing knowledge of theory and evidence of how humans change over time. But we also have another developmental master's, which is about developmental disorders. And we have a session on that later in the week. But this is a little bit more of a practical approach, I think, the developmental disorders, whereas the developmental psychology master's is a bit more about advancing your knowledge of the theory of development and then the evidence for those theories. But Gert will tell us a lot more about that in a moment. So I'll pass over to Gert now, and he'll tell you a little bit more, in a little bit more detail about the Masters in Developmental Psychology and what you might experience. And after that, we can have some time for questions and answers. And Gert and I will have a little bit of a chat as well about, our perspectives on developmental psychology in the department and why we love it. Okay, Gert. And so for the microphone, I found that you have to hold it, because otherwise if you move, you lose the sound completely, but not too close or it goes a bit.
Medium distance.
Here, yeah.
Thank you. Yes, hi, as Patrick says, I'm Gert Westermann. So I'm a professor in developmental psychology here in the department. My own work focuses on infancy research to understand how babies develop in the first few years of their life. So I'll tell you about the MSc Developmental Psychology, which I have been leading over several years and teaching on the main developmental module in that. So the main idea behind this master's course is obviously to give you a really deep and profound understanding of development, what it means to develop, the notion of change in development being very important, what changes, how do children change, how do their abilities change, which makes you be able to think about how can you positively affect this change, this development, from all different perspectives, from a social, cognitive, and neuroscientific perspectives, because we look at children from all these different perspectives to be able to construct a story of developmental change in general. But of course, this master's course is also there to teach you cutting-edge methods in psychological research more generally. So there are other modules that teach you basically how to be a scientist, how to write up your research, how to present your research, how to do research, and how to use all the resources that are available at the university and in the world to do all that. So it's a course that really gives you transferable skills in all of these domains, putting yourself out there, giving talks, receiving feedback, and well, anything that helps you along in your later career. So we are a nice group, I think, of people who are actively engaged in the psychological research and developmental research. We have a large group, not only for infancy, but also for child development, for example, literacy development in the department. So there's a lot of expertise here. And as Patrick mentioned, the labs, the research labs we have, they are really second to none, I should say. Whenever we show them to visiting researchers, we see their jaw drop because they've never seen anything like it. Such a wealth of resources and equipment that we have here for developmental research. So here's the outline of the course of the Developmental Psychology Masters. So there's one content module, the Developmental Psychology one, 3 skills modules that teach you these more broad and generic research skills, analyzing and interpreting psychological data, and then advanced analyzing and interpreting psychological data, and conducting and presenting psychological research. So two modules for data analysis and interpretation, one to give you a broad range of research skills, and a specific one on developmental psychology. Then there's one option that you can take from a range of other modules I'll talk about in a minute. And then finally, the crowning achievement for every master's course is the dissertation, the master's project that you do, which you normally would start around probably February, March, and hand in late August, September. So you have 6-7 months to work on a research topic under the guidance of a staff member. So developmental psychology, that's the module that I've been leading. Like I think all the others, all the single term modules, there are 10 sessions over the 10 weeks of the term, 2.5 hours to teach a range of topics. So we start with teaching about the theories of development, how people from philosophers in the past to psychological scientists nowadays have conceptualized what development is and how development proceeds and what shapes development. How to study children longitudinally, what are the pitfalls of studying children, and then also what methods are there to study children. So we have, for example, modules on sessions on neuropsychological methods like EEG, NIRS. I teach one on computational modeling, which is a way of theory building of development. And then we also have a section where people talk more, in a sense, practically about specific research questions. For example, this year we had development beyond childhood, the example of perspective taking by one colleague, the development of literacy, somebody taught this year, and auditory cognition. These can change depending on, staff expertise and so on. But so it's theory, methods, and special topics is the split in this module. It's also very exciting that in 1 week, normally in week 5, we have what we call a hot topic debate. So this is that in week 1, groups get together to think about a topic they would like to debate, where there can be pro and con or 2 viewpoints. For example, is childcare good for children or not? Should children with ADHD be given medicine or not? And then the groups have to kind of present this debate. They always have a lot of fun doing that, preparing for it. And then in week 5, typically, all these groups in turn give these presentations. I believe childcare is good. I believe childcare is bad, and what the reasons are for that. So everybody has a really good time doing that. So that's the developmental psychology module. And then the analyzing and interpreting psychological data, that's Patrick's specialty, right? You're involved in that. So it's basically how the data that we collect, how can we make sense of it? So relate the psychological data to behavior and theory. So about data storage, data management, data ethics, and of course, how to analyze data statistically. The crowning statistics module, I think, and in this course is advanced analyzing and interpreting psychological data. Here, the students gain really cutting-edge skills in modern ways to analyze data. And you might have heard or seen that the way in which we do data analysis in psychology is really changing quite a lot, quite rapidly these days. New techniques are being developed, new languages are being developed, how to do that, but also new ways in which to, design experiments to make the data more robust. And this module is really very, very good to give you these skills. The students coming out of that, they really have the cutting edge. In fact, many staff members also audit the same module who are not as cutting edge yet, so it's very good. And then conducting and presenting psychological research, that's also a very nice module that has a long list of topics about how to do proper science. So I just brought the timetable from last year to give you some examples. Let's see here. For example, there was how to studying at a postgraduate level, how to read, critically analyze journal articles, how to write essays at the postgraduate level, critical writing, then ethical aspects of research, how to present research in talks, visually presenting data, and different methods as well, programming, TMS, etc., meta-analysis, data archiving. So really very specific, very cutting-edge skills about scientific work. So the option modules, and last year, the choice here was analyzing talk and text, developmental disorders, which is the kind of core module of the disorders masters, a literature review module where you basically do an independent literature review under the guidance of a staff member on a topic that interests you, psychological aspects of advertising. So we also we have a master's course in advertising. And so the psychological aspects of that are also very interesting, how people respond to advertising, etc. What are the psychological mechanisms? And social psychology. So these are the option modules that you can choose. Then the dissertation, as I said, the research project where you can apply everything you have learned up to that point and during the second term to this research project, again, under the guidance of one of our staff members, and spend quite a bit of time. So it's bigger in size than your final year undergraduate project. But it is a research project where you sometimes, I would say, not even more than sometimes, these projects come out of a quality that they can actually be published as a scientific article. So it's because you spend that much time on them. And the questions can either be questions that you have come up with and find a supervisor that is happy to be able to give you input, or that the supervisor kind of nudges your ideas if you don't have any to see what can be done. Then normally the student and the supervisor agree on the best topic for the student. Really, really rewarding time, I think, to spend these few months doing this research project. So why Lancaster? Of course, there are many developmental psychology master's courses around. Lancaster is, of course, a very nice place, and outside the department, I think many students like the atmosphere on campus, the campus, that the university is a campus, that it's in a green and nice part of the world. That's just the broad surroundings, right? In terms of developmental psychology, Patrick already mentioned the expertise that we have in the department about developmental psychology and the research equipment that we have to do that, and that we're very well connected internationally. One highlight here on the slide is that we are the only group in the world investigating visual and cognitive development in utero. So one of my colleagues is studying cognition in fetuses. If they prefer to listen to specific sounds, if they prefer specific visual stimuli by shining kind of light into the womb and measuring with a 4D scan how the fetuses respond to that. So that's not done very often, and really only here in the world. Yeah, Patrick already mentioned all the equipment that we have, the EEG, the NIRS, etc. And the dedicated lab manager, which is also quite rare, who's very active and very proactive, always trying to show off the lab and helping people in the lab to learn. She's herself a PhD. She completed her PhD some years ago. yeah, and very nice to help new students entering the lab to learn the ropes. Yeah, and as it says, you will graduate with advanced knowledge of children's development, ready to apply your knowledge in doctoral studies, a clinical, educational, psychology careers, or outside of academia and business, health, and education settings. So I think this master course really equips you with all the skills needed either to stay in academia or outside, the life skills. Yeah, the life skills are called transferable skills. So the career prospects, I think a master's course can really, compared with an undergraduate degree, enhance your career prospects because all these skills that you learn that you can apply for academic research, they are completely transferable to the outside world, where you have to also prepare reports, interact with people, analyze data, critically evaluate writing, etc., etc. We have a psychology employability program in which students can volunteer to work with staff members on projects and also not just as volunteers that are then providing help to the staff member, but also to reflect on their experience, what it means to them and what they get out of it. So we try to design this really as a career enhancing program rather than just students volunteering. And there's career advice at different parts in the university, both in the department and beyond. So the university takes this very seriously to prepare students for the career post-studies. So that's that. So here are just the examples of the employability of the transferable skills. Let's start with language. Of course, you learn to express yourself in writing. You learn to critically think when you read somebody else's writings. You learn to do advanced statistical skills that come in very handy. IT skills, of course, working in groups, for example, this hot topic debate I mentioned. People and the students enjoy very much to form these groups. They're normally between 3 and 5 students, and then to work on this topic together, and then afterwards having to present different viewpoints of it. And self-management, of course, that how much before a deadline do you start to work, and how do you work best continuously, or do you work best in bursts, switching between topics? Everybody has to learn about themselves. What's the best way? And of course, a master's course helps you in doing that. Did you want to talk?
Yes,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks, Gert. Don't go. So I was just going to finish up by talking about the generic parts of the kind of studentships that are available here at Lancaster and how to apply. So there's lots of different studentships and bursary schemes that are available for studying psychology here at Masters at Lancaster University. Excuse me. So, for example, if you're a graduate of Lancaster University, then you can apply for, we automatically are applied for the Alumni Loyalty Scholarship, which can give you up to 20% off your fees. There's also the Lancaster Masters Scholarship available to you, which is up to £5,000 for any UK student. There's also the Lancaster Global Scholarship for international students, giving you up to £5,000 in your first year of study. And there's also the Lancaster Sanctuary Scholarship, which is available to people with refugee or humanitarian protection status or citizen of Ukraine. And for that, there's full fees plus contribution towards living costs, and I think accommodation are provided there. But there's a lot more information about the scholarships available via this link at the bottom, Lancaster/study fees and funding, scholarships and bursaries. In terms of entry requirements for the Masters in Developmental Psychology, we look for a first class or a 2-1 degree or international equivalent in psychology as your first degree. But please ask us if you have alternative routes, because we really like to support diversity in our student population. It's good for the department, it's good for the student body, and it's good for you if you can join us. You need English language, overall score of 7.0. But again, if you're not quite there, then there are other routes to support your language scores to get you onto the master's program. And we really do welcome non-standard applications. So if you're in any doubt, then please do get in touch with us in the department or via this email address, pgadmissions@lancaster.ac.uk, to ask us those questions. So this is our standard award, a standard offer, but we do consider students with a whole range of different backgrounds. So how to apply, basically you go to this website and it will walk you through how to apply step by step. For a non-Lancaster University student, there's a £40 administrative fee that you pay to submit your application. For Lancaster University students, there is no administrative fee. It's free to apply. And we also have an easy application process for Lancaster University students. We don't need to provide references or an academic transcript. Those are just picked up internally. And we also have a guaranteed offer scheme for Lancaster University students where we guarantee to offer you a place if you meet the requirements. And we also have a guaranteed scholarship automatically awarded for Lancaster University students as well. And so you're automatically entered for one of the studentships, and the one that benefits you most will be given to you once you're accepted onto the course. So what are the next steps if you have more questions? Well, you can ask your questions now of Gert or me, but you can chat with a student at Lancaster University at any point via lancaster.ac.uk/study/chat. You can also chat with a member of staff as well about the master's course you're interested in. And the best way to do that is to email Gina, who's at the back of the room here today. Her email g.fisher1@lancaster.ac.uk. And so ask her if you want to talk to a member of staff, and then we can arrange that for you in a one-to-one meeting, either online or in person. And at any time you can contact our department's postgraduate team at postgraduate.psychology@lancaster.ac.uk. They're there to help students in the application process and as well as students who are already here. And you can have a look at our brochure as well. Okay, so we're over to questions now, but if you can, at some point, give us some feedback via this QR code on this session. And if you have any questions that we haven't yet answered, ask them now or pop them in via the feedback. Okay, so are there any questions from the room? Yeah.
The question is how the dissertation is organized. The answer is that it's one-to-one generally. There are perhaps very occasionally group projects, but it's really between you and the supervisor. Yeah. Mhm.
Yes, you do have that opportunity. So we look for students who we feel would flourish in the postgraduate environment for applications. So the standard offer is 2-1 or higher in terms of the first degree, but we really do consider students who are not quite at the 2-1 level if we can look at their other experience and their motivation around doing master's level studies. So we do consider students on a case-by-case basis, even if they don't quite make the standard route for application. Yeah. So please continue to talk to us about that, and yeah, please do apply. Yeah. So any more questions from the room? And any questions online? I don't think so. No. So while I've got Gert here, I do have some questions for you, Gert. So so you did a master's degree, I believe. No?
I went through the German education system where I went through the German education system where the master's degree is kind of integrated into the undergrad. So like what we call an M-Psych here. But I wrote kind of a master's level dissertation and had master's level courses. Mhm.
So we only have one microphone here. So as a consequence of doing that additional year, that up to master's level year, what kind of skills and reflection do you think that extra year gave you over like a standard like bachelor's level qualification?
So, I mean, you clearly have deeper reflection, and so sometimes you do things that you remember from your, in my case, from the beginning of your degree, but you look at them in quite a different way. Becoming kind of a scientifically minded person is really a gradual process. And so, for example, most people who join our developmental masters, they will have had a developmental psychology module on undergrad level. But on the master's level, we really think more deeply about that, and we think about the theory, you know, the notion of change much more, and what it is, what it means that children change, and how we can characterize that rather than just describing basically what changes when children develop. And for me, doing my master's level dissertation was really a profound experience because I had a very nice supervisor, and then also managed to publish my master's thesis, which was on a topic of early language acquisition. So just this time to spend on a research project for a number of months was really very nice.
Yeah. So just that extra depth that you get in that space to think about things a bit more deeply than you do at undergraduate level. Yeah. So tell us what kind of developmental research you're doing right now that students might come across if they did the developmental psychology masters.
Yeah. So as I said earlier, I'm focused on infancy mainly, so the first 2 years of life, which is really fun, but also very challenging to study because you cannot really ask infants to do anything. You cannot tell them to press a button if they know something. So you have to kind of use methods to infer what they know by looking, for example, at their eye movements or the size in which how the pupil changes size can also tell you about their expectations, their knowledge in a sense. So that's very interesting. And recently I've started to focus on young children's curiosity. So the notion that even young children like to learn, and they choose what they want to learn about. So this question, how do they choose? What drives this choice when they explore, for example, the world around them? Do they learn better when they're curious about something as opposed to when they're just given something by an adult? How sensitive are the adults, the parents, to the curiosity of the child? How can we measure this curiosity? So many fascinating questions. I think that's a very new topic to like people have thought about curiosity in adults for a while, but for infancy, this is really new, but it's profound because seeing already the infant as an active learner really changes the way in which you think about development and what contributes to successful development. And then you can also start thinking about how can you foster this successful development. If children are curious, how can you foster their curiosity? So that's what makes me come.
This makes me think of a conversation I had with my children on the way to school yesterday, where they said, school, you just can't learn things that you want to learn. They said it's a bit like prison with a grown up in the front telling you what to do. They said.
Very interesting. Because yeah, that is very interesting indeed. Because many people say, scientists say that children are really curious, and once they come to school, they lose their curiosity. And I've been thinking a lot about why that could be. And exactly, that they have to learn the things that they haven't chosen themselves is, of course, the probable answer. And then, of course, when you start from there, you can think, okay, how can we make them curious even in school? How can we give them something that they like to learn, even if there are 30 different children in the classroom? So as developmental psychologists, I think we have a lot to say about that.
Yeah, I'm sure things can be improved, but their school is very good. I must say that. And this was the first time they ever compared it to prison or said anything negative about it. But yeah, I think that ability for children to pursue and scaffold their own learning really, which can be is very valuable, and you see that in your early development research. Yeah, but yeah, trying to foster that throughout children's development, I think it's really important.
So we designed, for example, studies where, when you use eye trackers that measure children's eye movements, you can program the eye tracker so that when they look somewhere, something specific happens. So in a sense, we can already give young children who can't crawl around, who can't even go and grasp objects, we can give them a choice what they want to learn by making something happen when they look somewhere. So that's quite exciting to see, if, even for these very young infants, maybe 8, 9, 10 months old, if they look somewhere and choose, they want to know more about where they're looking, if that will improve their learning and their engagement with what they're looking at.
Yeah, so I just have one more question for you, which is about developmental psychology as a field. So in the last year or two, what is the most interesting and exciting study that you've come across and taught as part of the developmental masters? It could be your own work, but maybe
Well,
some work by other researchers.
Yeah, I can't really think of one specific study, but this notion of curiosity that I mentioned, I'm not the only one who's woken up to that. So the field is really turning to that, going away from passive absorbing information to considering young children as active learners. So that's really something that has happened in the past 2-3 years. And I'm glad I can be part of that community. But another thing that's, well, I guess maybe there are 2 more things I could say. One is that the scientific community has really engaged now with trying to make research, even with infants, robust, because, there are different things. Infants are very noisy. When you do a study with them, they get tired very quickly. They're often hard to recruit. So up until a few years ago, scientists, in a sense, could get away with testing very few babies and drawing very strong inferences from what they found, although even the data weren't very robust. Now, this is all changing. So, for example, now it's what is called the Many Babies Initiative, so that there are some very important research questions that have been addressed in the past, but maybe not as well as they could have. And now many labs around the world, including ours, get together and say, we'll all test the same question. And in the end, you have lots and lots of babies from around the world doing the same tasks. And then you can see, is the data much more robust? And also you can see, are there perhaps differences between babies? That's the other thing, that we are becoming much more aware that English or American or even European participants are not the standard of humanity and everybody else is a deviation, but that cultural diversity, everybody might be different, but there is no kind of baseline standard. And to understand how people differ, and developmental psychology can contribute here by saying, what is the pathway by which they come to differ? Do they have a common starting point, and how do they then diverge in the way they process information, in most basic things? So that's the other exciting thing that is happening in developmental psychology.
Yeah, so it's that collaborative spirit and also that diversity you get through the international collaborations. And
so there's really, for example, the largest conference on infancy research is called ICIS, and I'm the treasurer of that society. And we have the board meetings where we say we really want to increase diversity. For example, in organizing the next worldwide conference on infancy research, which will happen in 2024 in Glasgow this year, in fact, we are really trying to get scientists from underrepresented countries to give invited talks, because it will be mind-blowing to see totally different perspectives and experiences and data that people from so far underrepresented countries can present, to really get a more holistic picture of how development proceeds and how children differ around the world.
Yeah. So despite the lack of diversity in us as presenters today, I think that is a really important trend, the issue of diversity.
Even if you're not diverse yourself, you can contribute to increasing diversity.
Yes, exactly. You have to.
And if we were in other countries, we would probably be the diverse representatives, wouldn't we?
Yeah. We did diversify in terms of colours of our jumpers today. Yes. So coordinated that. Okay, if there are no more questions, then thanks very much for joining us in the room, online, and later by recording. But if you have further questions that occur to you, then please do get in touch. We're very happy to answer it. Okay, thanks, Gert. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, Ben.